Greetings YouTube, it's Rob from Sage Tower Games, and we are here with the Secrets of Magic book, and this time we are taking a look at the Magus class. Now, for those of you that may have remembered, I did do a little review of the Magus and Summoner from the playtest preview that we got a while back, talking about the classes, looking at them, comparing them, and I think most of us can agree that the Magus definitely had issues from the playtest that were not really good. So I'll be curious to see what the Magus class looks like in its final version. So as always, the Magus, for those that may not be aware, is a class that essentially combines martial ability with spellcasting. You can cast spells either with one hand, and in the old way, you could cast spells in one hand and attack with the other, or you can actually cast spells into your sword or whatever your weapon of choice is, and actually cast the spell while hitting somebody with the weapon, which I think is how they went about it in 2E primarily. So strength of dex is your key ability. It makes sense as you're a martial class essentially by doing damage with your weapon. 8+ con for your hit points, so you're a bit harder than your kind of wizards and the like. I skip over all this stuff because it's all the basic like expert train, that stuff. It doesn't make or break in my opinion. Eventually you get up to an expert level or legendary master level at some point. So we have arcane spell casting. It's important to note that casting a spell, pretty much your sword kind of counts as the thematic component for that. It's good to know. And you do have a spell book. So the first thing is spell strike, which we saw kind of before. 2-cost action, you channel a spell into a punch or sword to deliver a combined attack. You cast a spell that takes 1 or 2 actions to cast, and it requires a spell attack roll. The effects don't occur immediately but are imbued in your attack instead. You make a melee strike with a weapon or unarmed attack. Your spell is coupled with it using the attack roll to determine the effects of both strike and the spell. This does make your thing automatically magical, so essentially from level 1 you do have the ability to do magical damage, so anybody that has DR against magic will be easily overcome by that. Now, what's interesting is, and I don't think that this was part of the playtest version, after you use spell strike you can't do so again until you recharge your spell strike as a single action, which has the concentrate trait. You can also recharge it by casting a conflict spell or a focus spell of another type. Casting a focus spell for another type doesn't recharge your spell strike. Okay. So if you cast one of your conflict spells, which is like your Magus focus spells, it recharges your spell strike. However, you have to actually recharge it, or you can just use a single action to recharge it. So I don't think in the playtest version that they actually had cooldown, if you will. You just kind of had to kind of spell strike, and I think there was a way where it almost was like a full action process where you would take a step, you have the ability to move and then cast a spell kind of deal and attack all in like one whole turn aspect. Here it's 2 actions to cast a spell / attack, but then next turn you have to spend an action to recharge it. So you could essentially have to spend an action to recharge the spell strike, then do it again. These spell strike specifics, well, let's say it kind of explains a bit on how the spell strike actually works. So, because you're using a weapon, it only targets one person. Even if the spell normally hits multiple people, it would only hit whoever you're actually hitting. Reach obviously is a spell that would normally have touch. If you're using a reach weapon, it now has that extra range basically at that point. And it goes on saying that anything that like would happen based on the spell would also still happen. If they have to roll fortitude saves, if there's some splash damage, all that still happens after the strike. And another thing important, invalid or immune target. If the target wouldn't be a valid target for the spell, to begin with, casting it through the spell strike doesn't change that. It still misses. Now here you go. Some spells have different effects based on the number of actions you spend. 1 action, 2 action. You choose which one you want to do. A spell has to take exactly 1 or 2 actions. You can't use spell strike with a spell that takes a free action, reaction, or 3 or more actions. You can't use it to cast a 3-action spell. Now we have a stance. I don't believe we had Arcane Cascade in the playtest. An Arcane Cascade is a stance. So you use your most recent action to cast a spell or make a spell strike. When you do, you kind of spend an action after that to put yourself in this stance. Your melee strikes deal 1 extra damage. 2 if you have weapon specialization, 3 if you have greater. So +1 to +3 damage. If your most recent spell before entering the stance was one that can deal damage, the damage from the stance is the same type. So if you had like a fire spell, the damage is from your stance, now there's extra fire damage. Or if it doesn't, then it gives you different schools of magic and saying, force or mental or negative. That's also a good way to potentially get to do force damage or mental damage, which isn't really that common in some spells. So that's another way to get some of those elemental types. Hybrid study. So this is basically your specialization, if you will. Kind of like how some classes have an order, or they have like a, fighting style. So before we get to that, just want to make a note. It said people don't recall, because this came up a lot in the playtest. The Magus is still limited to that 4 spells, essentially, per level. But once they cap out, they essentially get 4 spells. They get the cantrips, but they only have 4 high-level spells, and they actually lose low spells, as we've kind of seen. You do have, and it's cool to actually say it, that there are ways to gain like extra spell slots for lower spell levels through feats, but generically as built, you have 4 spells for higher levels, and then you have your cantrips. So there's a good chance your cantrips are going to probably be what's running through the spell strikes for the most part. Anyway, back to the hybrid studies. So, Inexhaustible Iron. You transform the mass of a great axe, great sword, or polearm into an unstoppable force. When you enter the Arcane Cascade stance, and at the start of each of your turns while you're in that stance, if you're wielding a melee weapon in 2 hands, you gain temporary hit points equal to half your level. Now, what's interesting about this is it says and at the start, so as long as you're staying in Arcane Cascade, you gain temporary hit points. Does anything break you out of it? There might be other things that break you out of it, but essentially every turn you'll gain temporary hit points, almost like a mini regeneration. And your conflict spell is Thunderous Strike, so we can look at those spells later. Laughing Shadow is about like shadows and trickery. So you gain a +5 speed bonus, or +10 if you're unarmored. If you have a free hand and you're attacking a flat-footed creature, the extra damage goes up to 3 to 5 to 7, so you get more damage. And your other hand must be completely free, so you can't have like the shield that you can wear that keep your hand free and stuff like that. It has to be completely free. And the conflict spell is Dimensional Assault. This is a good one if you want to be really like quick and nimble around the battlefield. Like you have extra speed bonus, bit more damage, not worried about the two-handing stuff. Sparkling Targe. You've studied the applications of magic, training yourself to perform not just offensive maneuvers, but defensive tactics. You gain sheer block. Alright, that's pretty good. When you're in Arcane Cascade, with your shield range, your circumstance bonus to AC from your shield also applies to your saves against spells. Pretty cool. And you can sheer block spells that don't have physical damage. So sheer block's requirement technically is that the damage has to have some physical aspect to it to actually sheer block it. But you can actually block like a fireball, for instance. When blocking damage in this way, increase your shield's hardness by the extra damage from Arcane Cascade, so you gain a bit more hardness to your shield as well. And apparently this also counts for if you have like the shield spell that has the same effect. And your conflict spell is Shielding Strike. Starlit Span. With magic, the sky is a limit and you can't be bound by the confines of physical proximity. That sounds like an interesting lead to it. When you use Spell Strike, you can make a ranged weapon or ranged unarmed strike as long as the target is within the first range increment of your ranged weapon or ranged unarmed attack. You can deliver the spell even if its range is shorter than the range increment of your ranged attack. Pretty much this is your way to do ranged attacks with your Spell Strike. Now what's cool, we kind of pass over a little bit, is this little sidebar over here, which is really helpful. It actually shows you the cantrips and the first level spells that you have that actually have spell attack rolls, and therefore the only spells you can Spell Strike at level 1. So it tells you, Ray of Frost, Tanglefoot, Telekinetic Projectile, Snowball, Shocking Grasp. Those are the effects you can pretty much cast into your Spell Strike. And it's cool that it actually kind of like points it out for you. Twisting Tree. The staff is perhaps one of the simplest of weapons. So this is if you want to use a staff as opposed to like another weapon. While you're wielding a staff in one hand, the staff adjusts in its shape and weight, gaining the Agile trait, and increasing its damage die to 1d6. If you two-hand it, it lengthens, twists, and reshapes to gain parry, reach, and trip. And when you're in the Arcane Cascade stance, you can interact or release to change your grip on the weapon as a free action when you strike with your staff, including strikes made in the Spell Strike. This happens before you roll your attack roll. You can also interact to change your grip on the staff as a free action triggered at the end of your turn. So this is actually a bit interesting now looking at it. So what it means is, say the staff does 1d4 normally, right? You hold it in your hands, the staff, two-handed, let's just say, right? You go to attack. You use the ability to, and say you're in the Arcane Cascade stance. You go to attack. You change your grip, removing one hand, so now it's one-handed, which increases its damage die to 1d6, so it does more damage. At the end of your turn, you free action to put the hand back on, which then twists the staff again, giving you parry and giving you reach. So you can gain parry and reach. I am curious though. I guess you can't do it. I guess you would still have to be in melee range. Because like you have reach when you have two-handed. So like if you start to swing, then can you like let go and like attack and hit? Because when you let go, you lose the reach. Does that count? That's an interesting timing issue there. Otherwise, that's a pretty cool little way to give some staff some more love. I do feel like staffs don't really get as much love compared to some other weapons. So That's a pretty cool one. And the conflict spell is Spinning Staff. So this just goes into saying what the conflict spells are. It's pretty much the Magus focus spells and all that. Everything else is the same thing. You have, you know, weapon expertise, ancestry feats, studious spells. This gives you 2 special second level slots, which can be used to prepare Spider Climb, True Strike, Water Breathing. You add any spells from this class feature to your spellbook. At 11th level, extra slots increase to 3rd level, and you add Haste as an additional spell. At 13th level, the extra slots increase to 4th level, and you add Fly and an additional spell depending on your hybrid study. So you gain at 7th level, so for instance, you gain Mirror Image, Shift Blame, Dimension Door, Resist Energy, Warding Aggression, Stone Skin. Inactionable Iron gives you Enlarge, Earthbind, Dimensional Anchor, Twisting Tree, Magic Mouth, Slow, and Blink. So you gain some extra spells to cast, which is good because they had to give you some utility spells to cast without like giving you some more versatility to actually do stuff. Everything else is just, you know, increasing proficiencies, and you get Juggernaut. Level 19, you get double spell strike, which is the thing they did have in the last one as well, which pretty much when you make a spell strike, you echo the spell, so essentially the spell stays in the sword or whatever the weapon is, and you can cast it again next turn. So basically it lets you double the spell use, which will be good because at a high level, maybe you want to spend an 8th or 9th level spell to, you know, like cast into it. You can cast it twice now, basically. Alright, the Magus feats. Now as you can see by this list over here, there's quite a few on here. I'm going to try and go through these somewhat quickly, because I know some of them we did cover in depth with the playtest. So any new ones we'll definitely talk about. I'm going to kind of go through this a bit just so that we don't get bogged down in the feats themselves. Arcane Fist, this pretty much makes your unarmed attacks stronger. So if you're going to go for like a Magus Monk, that's your one. Familiar, simple enough, gaining a Familiar. Make an assessment, Magus Analysis gives you recall knowledge. What's interesting is, if you pass this recall knowledge check, it recharges your spell strike. So that's another way to actually regain your spell strike ability, which is cool that they're giving you feats that you can do. So you're not wasting a dead action to just, you know, recharge your ability. So you can recall knowledge on a creature. You gain a +1 if you already hit them before, and then you can kind of try and recall and bam, gain the spell strike back. Raise a Tome, which is this is the funny one from the playtest, when you pretty much you block with a book, kind of. You can hold up and like use it to give you stats, but you can also use it to block. Cantrip Expansion we've had, that was the one that gives you extra cantrips per day. So more spells to cast. Let's see, Expansive Spell Strike. Expansive Spell Strike allows you to use spells that can target an area, you know, burst, cone, or line. So let's see how it says. How does that work? If your strike critically fails, the spell is lost. Creatures use their normal defenses against the spell. They start saving throws. So the arc must be a bell on the corner of the target square. The square closest to the target. Okay, so basically the key point is this last sentence. So the spell hits whatever it would hit, but the strike only hits the actual target. So say you cast like a cone of cold into your weapon. You attack, and the sword hits the person in front of you, but the cone will still shoot out in that like cone shape that must emit from you. So that's cool. That's a cool way, and that gives you a way to cast those spells that don't require an attack roll and cast them into the weapon. Force Fang gives you the Force Fang Conflict spell. We're definitely going to have to go over these conflict spells a bit to see what we think of them. Spell Parry. You infuse magical power. You can raise your guard, giving you a +1 bonus to AC against spells. So it allows you to kind of help block spells. Again, you have to have one or more hands free. That's probably a really good one for that shadow. I forget what it was called. The shadow-based study. Spirit's Sheath. This does that you kind of hide the weapon that you are walking around with, which is good in the sense that even though it may seem like a bit of a weird feat, if you will, but think about it, because you're essentially a magic caster. So you could technically conceal the weapon, probably pull off deception checks to say, well, you're just a wizard, you know. You're not anything, you don't have a weapon on you. And then you can spell strike, boom, draw the weapon, and then cast a spell. So that's pretty cool. Although if you get hit with a dimensional anchor, a dimensional lock, that would suck. That would suck horribly. Devastating Spell Strike. So Devastating Spell Strike just means your arcane cascade damage splashes out, which is okay. It's a nice way to get do some more damage. It does specifically say inaccessible iron. So that's the one that gains temporary hit points and has the two-handed weapons. So you're kind of just the big brawler type character. Distracting Spell Strike is that's the one, the Laughing Shadow one. You make a spell strike and feint against the target. So pretty much you get to feint somebody to try and throw them off, make them flat-footed before you attack. Nice little way to kind of hope that that strike hits then. Emergency Charge, surprisingly enough, that's the sparkling one. You immediately raise a shield or cast shield. That's interesting because I've totally forgot. Fighters have it automatically as a reaction where they can quickly raise their shield as a reaction to do shield block with it. But otherwise, you would have to have the shield up, ready to go, or the shield spell. This allows you to get that shield up if you need to. Let's pause for a moment, and let's just admire this amazing artwork that we have over here. This is pretty cool. The armor, this is like a... It's not, I wouldn't say a pick because it has the hammer side over here at the end. So it looks like a hammer that is just glowing with arcane energy. Really nice. Anyway, back to the feats. Starlight Eyes. So this again is for the range one, and this just lowers your concealment and hidden DCs, which is also really cool. That just allows you to have a better chance of hitting concealed targets since you'll be ranged. Steady spellcasting makes a lot more sense for you to have it so early. I don't know what level it normally is for people, but just because you don't want to lose your spell casting it. Striker's Scroll. This is when you can put the scroll, kind of affixing it to your weapon, and then you can use the scroll as part of your spell strike. Student of the Staff. I'm curious about this one. This is for the staff, the Twisting Tree Hybrid. When you critically succeed at an attack roll, you apply the crit specialization of the club group, and your staff gains the deadly d6 if you're in the Arcane Cascade stance. In addition, you can place property runes into a magic staff you prepare, even though a magic staff can't typically hold property runes. You must first inscribe the property runes into your spellbook. Wait. Okay, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm thinking to myself, like, I know there's I just gave my group a +2, like, greater striking mithril staff. But that's not what they mean. They mean like an actual staff. Like a staff of fire, or like a staff of necromancy, I think. Those don't have property runes on them. But you can make it like a +2 staff of necromancy. And then you can inscribe runes. Or can you inscribe the shifting rune? Okay. I think that's what that means. I'm not that well versed with staffs. Part of the issue with staffs in general is that staffs don't have that greatness to them. Attack of opportunity, easy enough. Cascade countermeasure gives you the cascade countermeasure conflux spell. Knowledge is power, gives you bonus to your if you recall knowledge. Be a good one to combo with that Magus analysis one as well. Should a tome. You have a bookmark in your book that essentially acts as a shield. So then the book has all the bonus hit points and broken threshold of the shield. That's funny. So the book counts as a shield and counts as a book. That's funny. That's actually a pretty cool one. Capture magic. So this is when you kind of save against a spell. You enter your Arcane Cascade stance. Until the end of the turn, you get +2 stats bonus to damage from your Arcane. So pretty much, you enter your stance and you gain a +2 damage from the thing. Oh, the plus is only if you're already in the Arcane Cascade stance. Otherwise, you get a free chance to automatically pop into Arcane Cascade. This is. I just want to, again, just before we go on here, it's the Arcane Fist, so it's like the Magus monk, but it's a catfolk. That's actually pretty cool. Like, that might have to be a cat to make. Fuse staff. In prepare staff, you can hold it up to a weapon to merge the two items. You can switch the fused item's form from the weapon to the staff, or vice versa. Okay, so essentially you can combine a staff with a weapon. So you can still use the weapon to, do your weapon stuff and your spell striking with. But then you can use the staff as to cast a spell. You just have to kind of change them between each other. Runic Compression gives you the, Runic Compression Conflux spell. Spell Swipe. So Spell Strike is pretty much 3 action, but it gives you the cleave, almost a cleave effect, where as long as you have something charged, so you pretty much have to spend 1 turn casting the spell into it. Don't attack. Next turn, you do the Spell Swipe where you swing, and 2 people next to each other can get hit. Standby spell. You've owned 1 spell as your favorite combat technique. This pretty much allows you to keep a spell in your spell book as a spell that you can always cast without having to prepare it. You can cast a spell without having to prepare ahead of time by expanding a spell slot of a sufficient level to cast your chosen spell. So you pretty much can keep a spell on reserve. You don't have to prep it all the time, but you have to burn a slot still for it. Cascading Ray, I believe, was in the playtest. And essentially the damage, depending on what damage you've done with the spell, it like arcs out basically and does additional damage to somebody else. Dazzling Block gives you a good little AoE, which is pretty cool. So you can sheer block, and you can potentially dazzle or blind a bunch of people in a cone when you sheer block. That's actually really cool. Dimensional Disappearance, you get a Dimensional Assault focus spell and the Laughing Shadow. You pretty much, when you do the Dimensional Assault, you get invisibility at the end. So pretty much the Dimensional Assault, I'm assuming, lets you teleport and attack based on how it sounds. So you get to teleport and attack, but you can choose to not take the attack and just go invisible instead. Lunging Spell Strike. Your spell unwinds the structure of your staff to make it exceptionally long, or even separate into shards held together by magic power. Make a spell strike with a staff with a spell that isn't a cantrip or focus spell. Increase the staff's reach by 5 feet times the spell's level. So say your 5th level spell, that makes it an extra 25 feet reach for your spell. That's actually crazy. You could just go like have a spell in your staff and it just makes it into like the pole from like Dragon Ball. It just go whoop and just hits. Meteoric Spell Strike. This was also something that I think was in the playtest, which essentially allowed you to, when you hit somebody, the damage between you and the target take damage. So, alright, not bad. Rapid Recharge. Once per day, recharge your Spell Strike. Sustaining Steel. This is the one that lets you regain your hit point equal to double the spell level. So this just lets you heal up, which makes sense because you're kind of really going to be in the thick of it to really, gain extra hit points. Ooh, a spell level that's like an orc. Conflux Focus lets you gain extra focus points when you refocus. Magic Sense gives you detect magic. Overwhelming Strike lets you help overcome resistances to some of the elements. So that's another way to help deal with that. Arcane Shroud casts a spell on you essentially from when you cast a spell. So you cast an abjuration spell, you gain Stone Skin. Hasted Assault, you gain the Hasted Assault Conflux spell. Preternatural Parry gives you an extra +2 bonus against the triggering effect. So whatever, I think Spell Parry is a +1. This one gives you a +2 against that specific spell. Dispelling Stealth Strike, it lets you pretty much counteract a spell effect on the target you hit with your Spell Strike. Resounding Cascade takes the arcane cascade damage from you. You enter the stance basically, and it increases to anybody who's standing next to you. Conflux Wellspring. Refocus even more. Versatile Spell Strike. You can channel the entire realm of possibilities of your spell book into an attack. Once during your daily preparations, you can use a spell slot to hold that infinite potential rather than using it to prepare a spell. When you make a spell strike, expand this special spell slot to immediately prepare and cast a spell from your spellbook at 2 levels lower than your slot's level. So basically, at this point, you either have 8th or 9th level magic. Say you have 9th level spells. And if you have 9th level spell, you could put one of your 9th level slots as versatile spell strike. Which means that any time when you want to spell strike, you can cast any spell up to 7th level automatically into the spell strike. Prepare. Supreme spell strike makes you permanently quickened. Whirlwind spell, I think we've seen this before as well. You pretty much attack everybody in your range with you. Unfortunately, only the actual person. So this is good for spells that actually require that can hit up to 5 creatures. You can then use it to do up to 5 attacks. Unfortunately, you can only whirlwind the people that actually next to you, so you can't whirlwind with the stall at span ability. That's the summoner, so we won't look at that one. And those are the feats. So the last thing we'll do quickly is we'll just look at the Magus focus spells before we kind of hop away. Alright, we are back with the Magus focus spells. So, Cascade Countermeasure. You quickly adjust your Arcane Cascade to offer magical protection. Resistance 5 against damage from spells. So when you use Arcane Cascade again, it means you've ended the stance and the spell ends. Alright. Dimensional Assault, we've talked about it a bit. Teleport to any square in range that's within reach of a creature. And then make a melee strike against one creature within your reach. Any square in range. In range of what? Within reach of a creature. Like, how far can I teleport with this? I guess like if it's like all the way across the room, is that fine? That might not be a pretty good one then. So you get one melee strike. It's not a spell strike, actually. Force Fang. That we saw that this was one you got from a feat. You briefly turn your attack into a pure force. All of its normal stats and abilities. The Force Fang deals 1d4 plus 1 force damage. So pretty much this one, all this one does, just to kind of like clarify it, is if you have, like, say you have a lot of stuff that's going to be resisted, this lets you turn it into a different element. Force, which nothing really has force resistance really. Okay, that's not the greatest. Hasted Assault gives you the quicken to use it to make an extra attack. Runic Impression lets you pretty much gain runes on the weapon, besides what you normally could. Shielding Strike lets you attack and then quickly raise your shield in one action. Shooting Star essentially ping somebody with a range attack, ignores the concealment, and if it hits, it pretty much negates the concealment and reduces cover to anybody who's attacking them. So if someone's in concealment, you can see them, you shooting star them, it kind of pings them so that they are available to anybody to potentially hit them. Spinning Staff. You make a melee strike with your staff against one foe, and then a second melee strike with your staff against a different foe. Your multiple attack penalty applies to both of these attacks as normal. And lastly, Thunderous Strike. You swing your massive weapon, creating a massive sonic wave. Each creature in a 15-foot cone must make save, or take sonic damage, or they critically fail, they get knocked prone. And that are the focus spells, or the conflict spells, if you will, for the Magus. So with that, we'll look up at the Magus iconic, and let's discuss. What do we think of the Magus class? Now, I think it's cool what they've done with it. I definitely want to see how it plays out a bit more in actual playing. And I feel like the issue with the Magus is how useful will they be in actual combat. So for instance, we've seen like the Alchemist is cool on paper, but then in actual practice, they struggle quite a bit, personally. So how good is the Magus actually in combat? Do they run into the issue where they spamming cantrips and they have 2 or 3 spells they can cast, which they can hopefully save for the big encounters? Is that damage potential enough to warrant playing a Magus versus like a fighter or a ranger on another martial class? Because you got to figure that, yeah, you have the ability of casting spells and doing damage. Is that enough to offset just, you know, pounding away with 2 or 3 attacks every turn? That's the question, I think. And then figuring out, do you have enough versatility with spells to make it worth it? Like, are you struggling with actually finding spells that you want to cast to make yourself useful? That's, I think, is going to be the debate. Because you're pretty much trying to take a little bit of both worlds. But if the combination of both worlds isn't enough to keep you, like, in the quote-unquote running for the group, are you doing less harm than good? So what I mean by that is, are you not really enough of a caster to help the party overcome like stuff that a caster could help with? Are you not good enough as a martial character to be that martial like frontliner? Yeah, you have in the Execrable Iron as your kind of like really frontlining type Magus that can gain temporary hit points. But if you don't play that, are you still versatile? Like if you play a Laughing Shadow, does Laughing Shadow or Twisting Tree give you enough to make you be worthy? That's going to be the question, I think. And I'm really curious. Like I've said in my old video, I like the Magus class. It's one of my favorite classes. It's, you know, I played it in Kingmaker. I always liked the idea of this half caster, half martial class. So I really hope they do good things with it. And I like some of the things with it. I think they definitely helped a bit, I feel like. But I'm still curious to see how it compares to, say, the Summoner, which when we look at the playtest, the Summoner, in my opinion, looked better than the Magus did. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think about this class. You guys think it's good? Do you guys think it is worth it? Do you guys think, have you used it in any of your games yet? Let me know in the comments down below. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more Pathfinder content. Thank you.